vice versa.
All righty. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Deb Hodgson. I'm co-founder of New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Jen White and Lori Schreier. And my unplanned journey over the past 5 years is what has led me here today with you. In the fall of 2017, my husband and I scheduled to have our home measured for RF on our return from a hiking trip out west. I had planned to come off blood thinners, and I was aware that wireless could thicken the blood, so I thought it was a prudent precaution to take. I had also been having issues with insomnia, constant ringing in the ears, heart arrhythmia, palpitations, tooth and jaw pain, dry eye, facial flushing, dizziness, and blood pressure issues. I had developed severe pressure headaches that felt like my brain was swollen or on fire. I had great difficulty thinking, speaking, and remembering. I even got lost several times in the town I have lived in for nearly 40 years. I did not yet know that it was all related until we removed the wireless from our home and cars. My health quickly improved. My seemingly unrelated symptoms disappeared as well. Interestingly, the plant in my kitchen that sat there doing nothing for over a year suddenly grew 15 inches in just 2 months. That was an eye-opener to everyone in the family. It's much easier to believe what you can actually see. Realizing this is an issue that ultimately affects everyone, I stepped out of my comfort zone with a little push from reading EMF Off and the support of Cece, despite knowing others will certainly think I must be crazy. I held 2 public screenings of Generation Zapped and reached out to many, including legislators. However, my state rep, Patrick Abrami, was one of the only people who responded and was truly exceptional. He actually listened and did something. He investigated the science and was successful getting New Hampshire to pass the first U.S. law to begin addressing technology safety. The New Hampshire Commission on Health and Environmental Effects of Wireless Technology was established in the fall of 2019 and produced a groundbreaking report in the fall of 2020. The New Hampshire Commission report is a great place to become informed, to empower you, to protect yourself, your family, and community by becoming aware and learning how to use technology safely. We at New Hampshire for Safe Tech, along with Cece of Mass from Safe Technology, are supporting the Commission's work through community information sessions like this, and we thank you for being here. Our speaker today is Cece Doucette. Cece's been a tireless supporter to us here in New Hampshire, and we are so grateful to her. Welcome, Cece.
Oh, thank you so much, Deb. I'm so honored to be here with you. You really are such an inspiration, and that was just an incredible introduction of how you got involved in this issue, because this is happening to people all over the country, and most have no idea why their health is crashing so badly and that this could be a leading factor. So thank you very much for letting me share this spotlight with you here today. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share, and I'll go through a set of slides that will take an hour or so, maybe a little longer to get through. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions and answers. And everything in my slides that has an underline means when you get it, you can look for yourself at the science and the other documents that pertain to this issue, because we don't want you to just take our word for this. We want you to know it and to understand it, so you get to a comfort level of talking to others around you about it. But we're certainly here twice a month to do the heavy lifting for you. So if you can, or if you want to invite others to come along, maybe from your schools, maybe from your neighborhood, because we want to protect our neighborhoods from cell towers, etc. So however you find this information useful, if at all, we invite you to take these slides and do with them what you will. We'll also send the recording as well. Deb, we're recording this, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, so this is me. That MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's of technical and professional writing at Northeastern University, where I also earned a communications undergraduate degree. And never in a million years did I imagine this is what I would be using my skill set for today. But we're so grateful to have this opportunity to just simply provide the facts that we don't get through mainstream media, so we can all make better choices once we're better informed. So my journey started back in book group almost a decade ago, when my friend Wendy, who's an electrical engineer, was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And she tipped us off at book group that it looks like wireless is harmful. And I just made a mental note of it. And then something crossed my desk not long after that. And I was the grant coordinator for my children's schools in Ashland, Massachusetts. So I thought, wow, if there's anything to this, I'd ought to know, because I spent 8 years running campaign after campaign in our district, because the industry was pushing in their 21st century classroom campaign, and our little budget in Ashland had been cut to the bone, and we couldn't afford to just buy all this new equipment. So I started doing fundraising, and we got wireless infrastructure. We got iPads and Chromebooks and smart boards and minis and Apple TV. And what we were being told was this great new technology to help our kids succeed in the world. And then when I was hearing from 2 different sources that it could be a problem, I thought, well, is there any science to this? And so sure enough, I went looking for the peer-reviewed, published, independent science, meaning it wasn't done by the industry, it was done by scientists whose life work is investigating wireless radiation. And sometimes it's called microwave radiation, because it's in, there's a spectrum of the waves and how fast they go to carry our data back and forth. And it's in the microwave section of this electromagnetic spectrum. So this topic is called wireless radiation, it's called microwave radiation, it's called radio frequency radiation, and it's called electromagnetic fields, or EMFs. These are all the pulsations of two-way microwave radiation that carry our signals back and forth. So I started investigating, and I was just astounded that there are literally thousands of studies all over the world showing great biological harm. So I started sharing this with my schools, and it was not an easy conversation to have because the industry got in at the state level and started pushing in all these sweetheart deals to get our schools and the children equipped with all this wireless technology. So it was really hard to have this conversation. And I'll teach you in a second why we probably became the first in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices. Turn things off when you're not using them. Only turn on the Wi-Fi, like the wireless access points or the routers, only turn those on when needed. And always place the mobile device on a solid surface, not on your body. And we'll get more into that in just a sec. So I didn't know it at the time, but we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms. And then I realized they weren't actually enforcing this. So I went to my senator, Karen Spilka, with whom I had served on the local education foundation for a number of years. And I brought my science, and I brought our little sign, and I measured Senator Spilka's cell phone and her district director's laptop, and both devices went right into the red zone on my radio frequency detection meter. And they're looking at me like, really? I said, yes, and nobody knows. The way I was looking at it is this is a right to know issue, just like with drugs and alcohol and pornography and gambling and tobacco. Adults will make their choices, but we all deserve to have the facts so that we can weigh those decisions. And certainly we're all morally responsible for looking out for our collective children. So Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office, and together we crafted a very simple bill that would bring the right minds together at the state level and look at this issue and then decide what to do. And a little later in my presentation, I'll tell you what Massachusetts is doing right now. And I'll show you the report that Deb mentioned that is probably the best document in our country today, with a very good group of highly qualified experts who came in and helped to do that commission report. So then Dr. Deborah Davis runs arguably the world's greatest database and think tank on this issue called the Environmental Health Trust. Dr. Davis is a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on the Climate Change Nobel Peace Prize. And she is one of our nation's top scientists. And she thought, well, surely if there was something up with wireless, I would know about it. But then she discovered the wireless industry is pretty much using the big tobacco playbook, and we'll talk more about that later too. But somebody contacted Dr. Davis after she had started getting into this wireless topic and said, can we reference your Environmental Health Trust? We're going to try and build some training around this issue. Can we reference your website? And she said, absolutely. And she said, and you might want to contact this woman here in the US, me, who's been making some inroads with her schools and with public policy. And because I'm a tech writer, I volunteered my time to help bring this little nonprofit to market called Wireless Education. And that was in 2016, and we have just transitioned to a new platform, and we've updated the content of our course. But we can literally train an entire school, a family, a municipality, a workforce, literally in about a half an hour online. We've got a little off-the-shelf course that anybody can take for less than the cost of a movie ticket. And at the end, it provides you the opportunity to print out a handy tip sheet to keep on your fridge or in your cubicle at work. And it also has a certificate of completion for companies or schools that do this as required training. They just turn this over to the Human Resources Department and validate that they passed this little training course. So we hope that may be useful to you and your communities, because we now have training, which when I fell down the rabbit hole, we didn't have so many of the resources that we're going to share with you today. So on this journey, I was called one day by somebody who was informing me that there were world-leading experts coming to our state house here in Massachusetts to ask for right-to-know legislation. And so I went down to the state house, and for 2 years, I was the only person I knew who was talking about this issue. And honestly, in the beginning, I didn't really know what I was seeing or saying. I was just learning and learning and learning. And then to go into an entire standing room only forum at our state house, where we had Dr. Deborah Davis from the Environmental Health Trust. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. A captain of industry was in there telling us our federal communication guidelines for public radiation exposures are not safe, nor is Canada's Safety Code 6. And then we had Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair, who's a child psychologist, and she travels all over the world training on the risks of excessive technology use and the biological effects. And then we had another woman from the EMR Institute whose husband had been injured by radio frequency radiation. And she said, you know, we have these FCC guidelines. This was Janet Newton. We have these FCC guidelines, but our governments have dropped the ball and nobody is monitoring the cumulative exposures that we are now inundated with today. So I was just so honored to be able to go to this forum at our state house and then connect with all these other people in the state who knew about it. And so ultimately we founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And this is a website that anybody can go to where you will find links to the resources for science, for what's happening in the courts, for what our military studies knew so long ago and never told the public. And you'll find a page on cancers and infertility and electromagnetic illnesses. And so if anything on our website can help you to open this conversation credibly in your own community, please use the resources there. And we have a whole page on what's going on at the state level here in Massachusetts, and we'll talk some more about that. So somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked me if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference down at the NIH. And I said, I'm not a PhD or a doctor. And they said, that's okay. We really appreciate the way you convey information. And I said, sure. And then we put together a technology panel, and Theodora Scarato, who is the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, she joined us. Frank Clegg flew in from Canada, and he joined us. Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, Martin Pall, is one of the world's leading scientists, and he flew in. And then Peter Sullivan is a gentleman whose work I found online in the autism community. And he was a fighter pilot, like Top Gun, up there with all the really high levels of the Earth's electromagnetic radiation, plus the radar on his fighter plane, plus all the radiation used in the instrumentation inside the plane. And Peter's health started crashing. He dropped far too much weight. His teeth were starting to get brittle and break off. And then when his two little boys came into the preschool years, both of them were diagnosed on the autism spectrum disorder spectrum. And so Peter did what a lot of parents will do. They will clean out the diet and go to, really healthy organic eating. He went so far as to do the heavy metal detox. And what we know now from science, if these heavy metals are toxic inside of our bodies, but metal also serves to amplify radiation. So that can be problematic for some. And today he speaks in the autism community, and he says, those are all really important measures to do to strengthen our own bodies. But he said the first line of defense he recommends today is to do a digital detox and get the wireless radiation exposures out of the children's environment. And so Peter detoxed his children from radio frequency. And now today, both of his sons are grown young men in their 20s, if not 30s now, and neither of them are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I didn't even know that was a possibility. But apparently there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's bloodline. It didn't come from dad's bloodline or genes. It came from somewhere in the environment. So cleaning up these environmental toxins like Deb did when she got rid of the wireless at home and reclaimed her health, that can happen to so many people with just a little bit of education. So I like to share this link in particular because our talks at the National Institutes of Health were limited to 10 minutes or less each. So this is a very quick, highly credible way to invite others to join the conversation. And then when I fell down the rabbit hole back in 2013, we didn't have any way to train our doctors, our nurses, our firefighters, and other first responders to recognize, diagnose, treat, and most importantly, prevent these microwave sicknesses. And so we're so very grateful that today we have an electromagnetic fields medical conference. It was initially launched in 2021, but because of the pandemic, we couldn't go to Scottsdale, Arizona for the conference. So we had to take a giant step backward, learn how to put this entire conference online and hire new professionals to help us to do that. But in the end, we wound up with an exceptional medical conference that carries 24.5 continuing medical education credits, not only for doctors, but Elizabeth Kelly, who directed this conference, she also went the extra mile and got the accreditation for nursing as well. And our firefighters, as it turns out, need to have continuing education credits. And so any of them can now attend this medical conference online on their own time and earn professional training credits. The conference was reaccredited, and now it's still valid until those who enroll by June 15th would need to complete the training and apply for their credits by July 1st of 2023. So please, if what we teach you today seems fact-based and important to you, please go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and on our resources page, there's a letter you can print out to give to your own healthcare practitioners, or if you are in the field, share it with your profession. And there's another letter under resources that shows that the International Association of Firefighters back in 2004 put up a statement on the IAFF website saying we do not consent to having cell towers on or near our firehouses because firefighters were getting sick from the radiation constantly bombarded where they work and where they sleep. And so that's still out there on the IAFF website, but industry has gotten in through back doors, and a lot of our fire stations are being heavily exposed today. So feel free to bring the medical letter as well as the IAFF letter right down to your own fire station and talk to your fire chief about this. So this is how I got engaged in this. And next I want to show you what it was that very likely caused my schools to actually take baby steps towards safe technology. So for anybody who's with us today who owns an iPhone, I invite you to take that out right now and go into settings. And I'm going to walk you through the legal fine print that's come with all of our devices all along that most of us had no idea is in there. So there's a website that is part of the Environmental Health Trust called See the Fine Print, where you can go out and look at what these fine print disclaimers have been telling us all along. Like the iPad used to say, this can cause seizures, blackouts, eye strain. And I know of more than one child already who had their first seizures while they were on a tablet. So very serious. But for those of you who have gone into settings on your iPhone, and for anybody who doesn't have an iPhone, if you were to look up your make and model of your device and type in RF exposure, you'll find similar information. So from an iPhone, from settings, hit general. On a really old phone, you'd hit about, but most of us have been talked into upgrading our phones. But this little acronym GAL was a handy way to remember how to get back to this. So from general, go down to legal and regulatory at the bottom of general. Near the bottom, you'll see this. When you hit that, then about 4 down, you see this RF exposure, which is radio frequency, microwave radiation that they politely call energy. And when we read that legal fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance away from the body. So if you're tucking it in your bra, in your suit pocket, your shirt pocket, your waistband, your back pocket, you will be exceeding the FCC's limits for public radiation exposure. And by the way, as we'll discover in a moment, those limits were never biologically safety tested. They only said how much heat would it take from a device to raise the temperature of the gel inside the head of a mannequin. And that mannequin is built to specs for 90th percentile of military fitness of a man, 6'2" and 220 pounds or something. So unlike most of us walking around the planet today, no testing on children, no testing on women, no testing on pregnant women or fetuses or the environment. So those RF exposure limits were never protective to begin with. And another paragraph or 2 down, it says, you know, to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option like a speakerphone or a headset. And I have something here called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And this operates a bit like a doctor's stethoscope. So it uses a rubber tube to bring the acoustics up to your head. So on one end, you would plug in your cell phone and then set it as far away from you as you can. And then it comes up a wire. And what we know scientifically about this radiation is it amplifies around metal. So you never want to put something metal up to your head connected to a radiating device, like the earbuds are a really bad idea. You're putting a microwave transmitter on both sides of your brain, and then you've probably got that radiating device tucked on your body somewhere. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. It's got a pretty good acoustic control here for muting and volume control. And then it's got these two little ferrite beads that break any radiation that's coming up the wire. And then it just goes to a plastic hollow tube with just plastic earbuds that hook in over your ears and into closest proximity to your brain. So if you're interested, look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset, but make sure there's no metal. I saw one that had magnets so you could hang it around your neck when you're not using it. I thought, well, that's handy. But then I realized once you put it up to your brain, you've got metal drawing all the ambient radiation right into your brain. So just know you need to look at things. And the reason why you want to learn to reduce your exposure is these single devices like a cell phone. I'll come out of my slides for a moment and then we'll come back in, but I want to give you a demonstration. So these devices are given to us with multiple antennas constantly pulsing radiation to say, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? And make a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. And certainly our message is not no technology, it's safe technology. So once we know there's a cellular and a data antenna in there, there's a Bluetooth antenna, there's a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator antenna, a hotspot antenna. And for anybody who didn't know any better and upgraded to a 5G phone, there's extra antennas for that service. So all these antennas are different services that they've been selling to us without us really thinking about it. It's all there. So of course it must be fine, right? So this is an invisible toxin. And if the COVID-19 pandemic taught us anything, we need to be vigilant about invisible exposures in our environment. So I learned there are radio frequency radiation detection meters on the market that anybody can purchase. And then we can make this invisible toxin visible. So this is the one that was recommended at the medical conference for doctors to bring into their practices and loan them out to their patients. And so the science wants us to be at the number 10 on the middle number when I turn this on. That's 10 microwatts per square meter. So basically in like 3 feet of air, how much radiation is there? In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less. So it boots up and you see I'm in the flashing green. Flashing green is as good as you can get with this measurement here. We want to be at 10 or less. I'm popping around between 2 and 4 because, you know, it took me a while to get my head around this and I had nobody I could talk to about it. So it took me a couple months, but ultimately I said, look, I'm the mom. It's my job to protect my family and myself. So one by one, I figured out where all the radiation was in my home. And then I just one by one learned how to fix it. And fixing it simply means hardwiring, literally plugging wires back in. So on the back of your router, your modem router, you have Ethernet ports. And all you have to do is run Ethernet cables again. And who knew, but for like an iPhone, you can buy this $30 little lightning to Ethernet adapter. And then you just plug it into the Ethernet cable that's hooked up to your router because that's where the signal's coming in off the street. And then you just go into your device, into your settings and turn off each one of those antennas. And then only turn on the one antenna you need for as little amount of time as you need it when you're on the go. So at home, I have a landline, which is just, you know, a good old fashioned corded phone. I like this one. I got it at Staples for like 30 bucks. It has a good speakerphone on it. So if I'm in the middle of a call, I can be talking and also referencing things on my computer with my hands on the keyboard. So, you know, every problem that we've created with this, there is a man-made solution too. So some people have a lot of different devices at home. And who knew? there's something called an Ethernet switch. It's this little tiny thing that's like an extension box for electronics. So you would plug one Ethernet cable in from the back of your router, a big long one, run it to wherever you use most of your technology, and then just get separate cables for each one of your devices and separate little adapters if you need them. And the good thing is not only is hardwiring safer, but it's incredibly faster and your signal is far more reliable. Plus, with data and privacy, your data is not flying through the air for anybody with a $100 application out at the curb to hack in and grab your data. So we kind of got sold on all Wi-Fi all the time. And how would we know any differently when you listen to an hour of prime time and count how many ads do you hear from big Wi-Fi and big cable? That's who's controlling the messaging that we get. So we'll go into the science in a minute, but because this is invisible, I just want to give you a real demonstration of what it looks like when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode and these antennas start transmitting. Now I'm up into the flashing red, which is way, way higher than what is biologically safe. And this is just from one cell phone, and I'm not even doing anything. These are just the antennas doing their handshake like they do all day and night, unless we know to simply turn them off and choose to use technology safely. So I'm going to put this back in airplane mode so I can stop radiating myself here. And you see it takes a couple seconds to dissipate. And then look at that, back down into this quiet green zone. And although you and I don't hear this radiation, all that noise we just heard, that's what our cells are up against. So as we'll see when we look at the science, it's a neurotoxin. It's really bad for us. So we were at like 3 to 4 in my house because I've taken the baby steps, and one by one, I just fixed everything in my house. We went from, let's say, 4 to 651,000 microwatts per square meter. And the science wants us to be at 10 or less, not 10,000, just 10. So I know it can be very overwhelming when we first learn about this, but just know there are solutions for everything. And so now I'm going to resume my screen sharing. And, my brain goes towards solutions. So when I learned there were radiation detection meters, I thought, wow, let's get one for our library and let's get one for our schools. So I went after a grant in my town. And it took me 3 grant cycles to get one. The first time our select board was like, oh, we really don't know about this. Come back next time. I come back the second time and they go, oh, this is probably more of a board of health issue. And I had already met with our health agent, and he didn't know about Wi-Fi, but he did know back in the 90s when the industry first started putting cell towers in our community, they wined and dined our public servants and literally took them out to fancy hotel banquet halls and sold them all the benefits of this new technology that was coming in. And oh, by the way, if anybody's concerned about environmental impact, gosh, the law says you can't sue for it. And guess who influenced the writing of that law? The wireless industry. So then, as you'll see in a moment, I introduced legislation with Senator Spilka. And when I was testifying down at the State House and showing the science and measuring the radiation in the room, I could tell that not one member of the Joint Committee on Public Health even knew this issue existed. And so I spent, years actually going up to the State House and educating every legislator who had a hand on one of our bills, or their staff, or their chief of staff, or their legislative attorney, just educating, and not one of them, save one gentleman, he was the only one out of the hundreds of people I spoke with that knew there was an issue up at our State House. And this one guy, he let me teach him what I came to teach him. And he said, I know a little bit, but what do you have to say? And then he told me his father was the physicist who brought the team in after Chernobyl blew. So he grew up knowing about radiation, but he was the only one. So that taught me that I need to get out and meet with my own town and meet with my board of select persons one by one. And so I arranged all these meetings, and then I resubmitted my grant application. And they said, well, we don't have a great comfort level with this, but we hear you. So we'll give you money for one device, and if the library agrees to take it into circulation. So I then had to go and present to our library board of trustees, and they took a vote 4-1 to take this into circulation. One gentleman sat there with his arms crossed and just looked at me like it was all hogwash. Another one couldn't wait to get that meter and take it home and measure her own house. And then a third one said, look, regardless of how we feel personally as a conduit of information in our community, I think that we should take a vote and see if we can bring this into circulation. And the reason I even got the idea for that is that when the energy industry started taking away our much safer incandescent light bulbs and replacing them with these swirly CFL and LED bulbs that actually have a lot of biological effects that they're not telling us about, when they were transitioning us to those, they put a kilowatt meter in our libraries as part of their marketing campaign. So that's how I got the idea to even put a meter on loan in our libraries, because the energy industry had already done it for their kilowatt meter. So we became the first in the United States to put an RF radio frequency detection meter on loan in our library. So anybody in my town with a library card can take it out and then share with their loved ones and go measure everything while they've got it out. At one of the medical conferences, I met a doctor from Newton, Massachusetts, and she and I went after a state level grant through our cultural council, and we got her a library acoustimeter. That's the one on the left here. And then this one on the right is the probably more current technology. And this one, they're both around the $400 mark. And out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, they now have one in their library system. So anybody from all the towns in their library system can borrow that meter. And out in Pittsfield, there is a Verizon cell tower that went up on top of a neighborhood that the day it was turned on, this little girl comes downstairs and goes, "Mommy, my head really hurts and I feel all buzzy inside." And lo and behold, that was the day during the pandemic when everybody was in lockdown and stuck in their houses 24/7, that cell tower was turned on. 17 children and adults in that neighborhood got so sick that they had to abandon their homes. They were living in cars, they were couch surfing, they were spending whatever funds they had on hotels. Some of them just sold their house outright and left. Others have returned and are getting sick again in their homes. And there's now some really groundbreaking action out there that we'll tell you about in a second too. So Pittsfield has one, and now people are contacting me from around the country saying, wow, we love that idea. And now most libraries have a library of things, like our library has a bicycle repair kit. They've got a projector you can borrow. They've got puzzles and games. So it's not too far-fetched to go ask your library for funding to put a radio frequency detection meter on loan. And then you could do some programming in the community to teach people what this is. And my local cable station has been so good over the years. They sent resources to my house, and we did a walkthrough just to show what some common exposures are pretty much in all of our homes until we know better, like the microwave oven, which only transmits when you turn it on, as opposed to the router and the cell phones and the wearables and the Roku and the Chromecast and the wireless security, and all of that are pulsing this big plume of electrosmog at us all the time. So I did this 23-minute public service announcement, and anybody is welcome to look at that just for ideas on where to look for the exposures and what to do once you find them. So what does the science tell us? We're going to look first at the long-term health effects, and then on the next slide, we'll look at the short-term effects that many people start recognizing with just a little bit of education. So child and adult cancers. Cancers can take a couple few decades to really surface, even though the cells are, getting weaker and weaker throughout that whole time. So for years, the industry would say, oh, there's no science. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Our own government, through the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, one of their programs is the National Toxicology Program. They are the gold standard on toxics research across the world. And they concluded a study that they did for about 20 years, and they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health with world-leading scientists and doctors and other experts whose life's work is studying microwave radiation. And at the end of the day, they came out with their final report that concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other harmful findings. So the industry, like they do, will say, oh, this is just one study. You need more than one study to corroborate anything. Well, right on the heels of our big study here, biggest study the NTP has ever done, $30 million. The Ramazzini Institute in Italy concluded another large study on cell tower base stations that the cell phones connect to. And they corroborated everything we found with cancers and DNA damage and more. So we don't need more science. What we need is an educated public and public policy to protect us. And we'll talk about great inroads on that too. So DNA damage they found, infertility, and anybody can go read the science. And that's why we have these links here. So when I started finding the infertility studies, I learned that they had taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating. And that laptop radiation changed the DNA, which is our roadmap to grow anything from a human to a plant to a pollinator or any biome out there. It slowed the motility of the sperm and it caused apoptosis or programmed cell death. It was killing off the sperm in 4 hours of exposure to microwave radiation. So that was the day that I got serious about this issue, because my older daughter had just gone up to college with her MacBook, which of course she's using right on top of her reproductive organs. And my youngest daughter, for Christmas, she had just gone into high school, so we bought her a laptop for Christmas. And of course, where is she using it but right on top of her reproductive organs? And since I was doing my investigations since then, Kaiser Permanente and others have come out with independent studies showing greater miscarriage rates for women who are using radiofrequency radiation. So there's not a lack of science, there's just a lack of knowledge to the public on this. And then neurotoxicity. So Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OB/GYN program at Yale Medical School. And he has actually done some of the science on this with the rodents. And he has seen that when you expose the pregnant mice to this radio frequency, their offspring come out bouncing off the walls of the cage, much like a child with ADD or ADHD. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab here at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist, and she sees huge connections between what we know happens with environmental exposures, including this leading cause of microwave radiation, to the families in her care. And then Alzheimer's, it used to be like cancers. It would take years and years and years for it to present in our 70s or 80s. And Dr. Martin Pall has published a study recently that shows that it's not just our very elderly. It's now happening to people in their 60s, their 50s, their 40s, their 30s, in some rare cases, 20-year-olds are getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So for years, the industry would say, oh, there's no scientific mechanism of harm, but we know now many different ways that this is happening. And for the neurotoxicity, we have research by Dr. Pal Patcher and other colleagues of his that show when you expose the brain to these many, many spikes of microwave radiation emissions hitting us, the Earth pulsates its own natural electrons at 7.83 times per second. That's like 7 pulses a second, and that's measured in hertz. Today, our microwave radiation is being pulsed at us in the megahertz range, which is 1,000,000 times in 1 second. It's doing this jackhammering. And in the gigahertz range, that's 1,000,000,000 cycles per second. And what Dr. Patcher and others found is that that constant jackhammering of our brain with this microwave radiation is opening up something called the blood-brain barrier. That's a membrane that's supposed to protect our sensitive areas, like the brain, from toxins getting in there. And what the science shows is that this radiation is breaking down the barrier. And so now toxins that are being escorted out of the body through the bloodstream can take a turn and go into this highly sensitive area of our brain, let alone the actual microwave radiation penetrating the brain. So if we look at this graphic by Dr. Om Gandhi, one of the scientists, he compares a child to an adult. So these head models are tilted sideways where the yellow is the ear. When you and I put an active cell phone up to our brain, it's penetrating inside our brain about 1/3 of the way with microwave radiation. When we do this to a 10-year-old child, the modeling shows it goes about 3/4 of the way into a child's brain. And on a 5-year-old, if you ever let them put a radiating device up to their head, it is penetrating the brain with microwave radiation almost the entire way through. We now know scientifically that children's brains have a higher water content. And just like with our microwave radiation, that's what gets those microwave molecules going inside the microwave oven. It's the water. And so children's skulls are not yet fully formed. They're thinner. And so more radiation can get through than for you and I, and it's not good for you and I either. So we're always very grateful when mainstream groups start tuning into this issue. And one of the groups that I knew about as a mom was the Environmental Working Group, because they every year put out a list called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen with regard to pesticides and which produce you should be buying organically if you can get it, and which other conventionally grown produce you can do okay with because it doesn't get penetrated as deeply as the Dirty Dozen does. So I knew about Environmental Working Group, and they now have funding and a PhD who's working on this issue, and they have come out with fact sheets recently. This one is protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and homes. So this is a nice resource that is rather mainstream that you can use to open the conversation with others. And they also have done one about the radio frequency radiation on the central nervous system. So you know, we really would do well to tune in and just keep opening this conversation, because if we don't, look at today's children, more than 50% of them already have a chronic illness. And the science teaches us another mechanism of harm. It's called oxidative stress. And if we're not getting enough oxygen to our systems and our organs, then that causes oxidative stress. And over time, as Dr. Cindy Russell tells us, she founded Physicians for Safe Technology. Dr. Russell tells us it's like we're rusting ourselves from the inside out if we have chronically exposed ourselves to these environmental toxins. So let's look at the short-term effects. And it's helpful to know that as far back as 2002, the Americans with Disabilities Act already recognized electromagnetic sensitivities, and they have recommendations for steps to take at home and in the workplace to reduce these exposures and to offer accommodations so people who can't be in a radio frequency or high EMF environment can still contribute to society and participate. So we'll go through common symptoms that a lot of people experience, and then with just a little education, they decide, well, what have I got to lose? It doesn't cost me anything to just turn this stuff off. And time and again, people come back and say, wow, I didn't want to know about this, and I didn't want to believe it, but I hadn't slept in so long. And they simply turn everything off at night. You can still use whatever's on your device with the antennas off, your clock, your alarms, whatever you've downloaded for entertainment, your camera, all of that's on the device. Just turn off the antennas, turn off the routers, turn off the Roku, the baby monitor, whatever you've got radiating in your house. Time and again, people come back and say, wow, I actually slept through the night for the first time in ages. Or headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, finally start resolving. Nosebleeds, ear bleeds, chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities. What the science shows us is the surface of our skin has all these little minute antennas. And when we're hit with microwave radiation, a lot of people start getting rashes. They talk about the hot ear from the phone, ringing in the ears, tingling in the skin, neurological abnormalities where they're keeping their cell phone maybe in their pants pocket. So we know now we are biologically electrical beings. Our cells whisper through these electrical, pulsations, like you go to the doctors and you get an EEG or you get an EKG to measure the waves of electricity for your heart and your brain. Our lungs are a big organ that runs electrically. So for some people, when they're exposed to this microwave radiation, their heart starts going too fast or too slow, depending on what their individual makeup is like. And then the cognitive impairment, where, we used to see that Alzheimer's coming on at later ages. Now, so many people can't remember what it was they were doing. And then this was just so heartbreaking at the medical conference to have more than one of the presenters say, if we don't stop exposing our society to these levels of microwave radiation, we can very well, as the science tells us, it's a neurotoxin. It's changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain, where we would make smart executive function decisions. If that gets damaged, we can well expect to see many more of these societal outbursts like the mass shootings that we have been seeing. And I remember as kids were going back to school with the pandemic, and they had been issued these Chromebooks and other tablets with no safety training. They'd been home using them perhaps excessively because mom and dad are trying to work and watch the kids who are no longer at the school grounds. So they probably were spending excessive times on these devices. There were reports in the news here in Boston of at least 3 schools where the kids were literally beating on one another with their Chromebooks. So we have got to do our part to get a hold of this. Anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, even among children, like we have never seen before. Even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels. This is a neurotoxin. And Dr. Martin Pall, here's an article he published in the Journal of Chemical Neuroanatomy. Microwave frequency electromagnetic fields produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. So that's a really good paper you can access through this link here. And unfortunately, it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet that can be impacted negatively. With the pollinators and the birds, we know that they have their own mechanisms like magnetite and other, built-in functions to their beaks and their brains that keep them in synchronicity with the Earth's electromagnetic field. And that's how they navigate to where they need to go, like the pollinators back to their hives and stuff. And now the science is showing us, because we've introduced this huge and growing layer of electrosmog, it's dysregulating their own navigational capabilities. And so they are not being able to find their way back to where they need to be. And other studies show, if you put an RF device near a beehive, for example, it has caused the bees to swarm because we're getting overpowered We are not built to be at these high levels of radio frequency energy. And for those concerned about energy consumption, as far back as 2012, one of the Greenpeace analysts indicated if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was more than a decade ago. And look at everything else we've brought in since then. So, and again, we don't hear about this through mainstream media because it's owned and run by these industries. But there's just human atrocities going into the mineral extractions, and there are dozens of minerals that go into every one of our devices. If we really understood that, we would never just toss aside a perfectly good device because there's a shiny or new object on the market. We would only use it as sparingly as we could and make it last for as long as we could. Data warehouses, networks, our own devices are constantly using energy. With all this streaming they're pushing on us now, the sending and the receiving of all of our messaging, our texts, our emails, all consume energy, in this relentless charging that we do all day, every day of our devices over and over again. That's consuming energy. And then, we've been seduced into all these really cool apps. So we have a bunch of them on our devices. Honestly, we probably don't use most of them. So let's take all of those off, and then they won't be doing updates in the background. And then we just learn to keep our devices in airplane mode as a default, hook up with hard wiring, and you will consume far less energy for yourself and for our world. So when I fell down the rabbit hole, I kept thinking, this is overwhelming. This is just unbelievable. Surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came up with this free online 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And look how they've got this revolving door as their graphic on here. And that's the state of affairs today. Most of our FCC commissioners came right from industry, and they are not protecting the public. They are protecting corporate profits over public health and safety. So that was my missing puzzle piece. And I was like, well, shoot, nobody is protecting us at the federal level. So that was when I started realizing, we really need to double down and do more at the local level, because there are actually a lot of things that we can do to protect ourselves through good local zoning code. And then for the stuff that we bought and are radiating ourselves with, we can just learn how to use that in a safe manner. So this Captured Agency report is really good and really eye-opening. And more recently, last fall, ProPublica started reporting on this issue. And they wrote another more current article on how the FCC shields cell phone companies from these safety concerns. So remember that $30 million study our National Toxicology Program did? That was supposed to trigger public policy to protect us. But the folks who commissioned that study were in the Food and Drug Administration 20 years ago. Those folks are long since retired or have passed away. And now the gentleman who's in charge today is this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. Now, Dr. Shuren, if you go look him up, you'll find that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry. He should have been nowhere near that study. And at the end of the day, he went over to the FCC and said, oh, we don't really believe that study. Just keep doing what you're doing. So the FCC, the FDA, all have these huge conflicts of interest going on. And sadly, it goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. If you just type in World Health Organization, electromagnetic fields or radio frequency radiation, you will get information that's really out of date. And it is not what's happening today. In 2011, the World Health Organization classified this radio frequency radiation in the same category as lead, thalidomide, chloroform, and a whole bunch of other toxic chemicals as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. In 2011, we didn't have the animal studies finished yet. Now that we have the National Toxicology Program, rodent studies, and we have the Ramazzini Institute from Italy, we now know, and the scientists are calling for this to be reclassified as a group 1 human carcinogen. So they have reopened their investigation, but you'll be hard pressed to find it out on their website. But if you go here, you will find this page where they have reopened the investigation to look at cancers, to look at electromagnetic illnesses, to look at infertility, and to look at the impact on children and what this is doing to our environment. But what we now know is there are 2 groups at the World Health Organization that address EMFs. One of them is industry-backed. The other is the independent scientists who are actually qualified to weigh in on this issue. It looks like the industry one might have hijacked this. They're supposed to be coming out with a report in the next year or 2, but we don't hold our breath because the corruption is so rampant. So let's look to solutions. All right, so here's just a visual on what you can do, a 3-step process at home, at school, at work. Hook up from your router, get a big long Ethernet cable. If you have more than one device you want to hardwire, get an Ethernet switch, then get little Ethernet cables with adapters that go right to your devices. Do it for your laptops and your tablets too. Do it for your gaming devices. Don't use a cordless baby monitor. Those are, oh my gosh, so toxic. And then you just go in once you've hardwired and turn off all the antennas in the router. You can just call your internet company and ask for their help for doing that. In your own device, just go into settings and turn off all the antennas. Same thing with the other laptops and stuff. So turn off the antennas. And the 3rd step is to measure. Maybe you'll want to get together, some people $400 or $200. There are different levels of meters you can buy. For some people, that's not a problem. For others, they'll go together with their neighbors or their family members and they'll all pitch on and just share one amongst themselves. Others are going to their libraries and getting one for the whole community to use. So with 5G and the Internet of Things, industry is looking to put a cell antenna in just about everything you buy these days so they can connect everything to everything. And a lot of people think that's a really bad idea, not only from a health perspective, but from data security and privacy and just protecting the human genome. A lot of us don't want to turn into artificial intelligence. We want to be able to have control of everything in our own spaces. And so to do that, you really need to measure. We bought a new stove recently. Our old 25-year-old stove was finally conking out. And my husband had one delivered to the house here. And I looked at it and it had smart technology. So apparently you could pair that stove, that range, with your cell phone, and you could turn your appliance on or off when you're not even home. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but it sounds kind of dangerous to me. But a friend of mine had bought a new stove and we could go right into her settings on the control panel and turn off the antenna and then measure and make sure it was clean again. But the one my husband got didn't have that feature. And I looked up the manual and it had the RF exposure and it said, stay 20 centimeters back from this device or you may exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. I'm over here scratching my head going, what? You're telling me to stand 20 centimeters away from my stove? How am I supposed to cook? So I called the company. There was no way for me to disable that. They sent a tech out to my house, and ultimately all he had to do was pull off the back of the stove. There was a motherboard behind the display panel, and next to the motherboard was this other little tiny board that was the radio frequency antenna, and he just unplugged it, and I measured, and I was back to a nice clean reading in my house. But that when I measured that thing when it was transmitting, it was 1,090,000 microwatts per square meter. And in our homes, the science wants us to be at 10 or less. So we really need to understand that with this push by the industry for the Internet of Things, having a meter in hand is really the only way to confirm that you've gotten it all. Because like my printer, wound up having 3 antennas in it, but only one was connected to the little glow light on the faceplate. But I was sitting here one day feeling like I was just getting sucked down. And it turned out that that antenna wasn't alone. There were 2 others in there. And I just had to look up the manual and find out where they were in the settings and just turn them off, because I use Ethernet cables between my printer and my CPU, or my printer and my laptop. So it's not rocket science to fix. It does take a little bit of time to just locate everything and fix it. So that's what you can do to safeguard yourself. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes going through some other exposures that you may or may not have direct control over. One of them is these utility smart meters that our towns have been talked into letting industry put on our homes or our offices or our schools. You know, when I was a little kid, I'm the youngest of 10 kids. And so hide and seek could take a long time, and I'd be hiding out in the bush. And I'd keep myself busy by just looking at the little dials going around on the meters that were mounted on our home. Those were good old analog meters. Those would last 40 or 50 years. They would measure your consumption of the electric or the gas or the water or propane. And then you would get a bill, and there was someone who walked the neighborhood and took a reading, and then you got your bill. Well, industry has come in and said, oh my goodness, you know, we have such better technology. We'll do all this energy saving, which actually has turned out not to be true. So they talked our towns into a cost save by eliminating the neighborhood walker and saying, you know, you can just first get a drive-by reading. And that's what we have in my town. They drive by, they point their scanner at my meter, they get their reading, and they can do the billing from there. Then those were the digital meters. And then they started going to the smart meters. And with the smart meters, it's like this grid that they have diagrammed here. So here's your house, here's the next house, here's the next house. Each hop is carrying more and more radiation to carry the data back to their transformer mounted on a pole that then is transmitted out to the power company. Or they can sell that data to a third party that now sees what your usage patterns are. With the Internet of Things, if you're buying appliances, they're going to know what kind of appliances you have, and they're going to start marketing to you, and they're making money off of selling your data, which is kind of unethical. But all this aggregate radiation builds up. And so if you happen to be the last one on the block there that's getting it, you're getting even more and more and more radiation as it comes through. And for privacy concerns, your data is flying through the air, and hackers can get at that. Thieves can get the data and know what your usage patterns are. They know you leave at 7 o'clock in the morning, you don't come back till 6 at night. They can back up their truck and take your toys. So this whole smart meter, smart grid thing has really turned out to be horrific for our communities. And a lot of people are getting sick from it. These things pulse radiation continuously. And as I mentioned, this radiation amplifies with metal, so it can literally hop on the house wires or the pipes and turn your home into a giant radiating antenna. If things are not properly grounded, we see fires and explosions when there's a surge on the line and there's no, breakers in there to protect. We see this far too often, and with fires, they can't just call the fire department and put them out, because you can't just hose down an electrical fire. You have to get to the electrical company and get that electricity shut down before you can even address the fire. And by then it can blow over to neighboring properties and stuff. So these smart meters are trouble on a lot of levels. And at the medical conference, they said that this is one of the leading causes of sudden onset microwave sickness when these smart meters or these digital meters get mounted on people's homes. And for example, Jeremy Johnson out in Silicon Valley, he was an engineer, and his wife is a medical doctor. And they both got really, really sick over a very short period of time. And nothing in her medical training could help them figure out what was going on. And then they figured out they had a whole bank of these things mounted right near their condo, and they just got walloped. So Jeremy Johnson has done a really good environmental justice talk here that says what their experience was. And most of the audience that he presented to had no idea that these smart meters and all of our devices and stuff are harmful. But the industry goes into economically depressed areas and environmental justice communities, like here in Worcester, Massachusetts, where they piloted with National Grid this smart grid pilot program that wound up making people sick. They went way over budget, and then they turned around and wanted to have the ratepayers pay for all the extra money they had to spend. So our Attorney General's office got involved, but only from the economic standpoint. They didn't get involved to protect public health. So this TED Talk is a good thing to share with engineers or physicists or technologists who've only been taught you have to have heat from a device, which is not how people are getting sick. The heat is bad, but it's the non-thermal effects that are especially dangerous. And then more recently, Dr. Alexia McKnight, she's a veterinary radiologist, so she knows radiation, but she didn't know smart meters until one got mounted on her home, and she got so sick with headaches and dizziness and nausea and anxiety, and so brain injured to the point where when she was driving in her car, she couldn't remember if a green light meant stop or go. Imagine how dangerous that is. So she has done a TED Talk, and I was honored to be asked to join her. And we did a professional development day at her children's school district in Pennsylvania, and we presented 4 times throughout the day. So, you know, if there's anything we can do to help in your community, if you can open the doors, we can bring the expertise and help train in your community. So we talked about our personal devices. We talked about the smart meters. The next source that we have very little control over, unless we have good zoning bylaws, are these cell towers. So it's critically important when you open this discussion with your loved ones or your towns to look at the independent peer-reviewed science, because we know in the Big Tobacco Playbook, that's what the industry is doing. They're creating their own science that shows no harm. So we always have to defer to the non-industry funded science. And, you know, I'm a tech writer, and as I started investigating, I got in way over my head, and then I couldn't remember where good resources were that I wanted to later reference. And so I just built a very simple research repository called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So there's no bells and whistles, just straight facts in bulleted form so you can get at stuff quickly. And I have one on cell towers that shows the science, and that we should at least be 500 meters from a cell tower. So there's a death curve that we see where the cell towers are installed, and within 500 meters of that, we see really high levels of cancers, neurological issues, sleep problems. And that starts coming down at the 500-meter mark. It doesn't actually catch up to regular population statistics till almost double that. But at least if we could start with 500 meters, that would be at least a somewhat reasonable compromise. So always look to the non-industry funded science. And if you go out to this website called antennasearch.com, you can enter any address in the United States, and it will give you a search return on how many cell towers and how many macro big antennas there are within 3 miles of that address. So I put in my home address, and there's like 140. I put in of these big antennas. I put in the State House here in Boston, and there are more than 4,500, oh my gosh, of these giant antennas within 3 miles of our State House. And mind you, these signals go for miles. So you've got more than 4,500 of these giant antennas constantly pulsing and creating all of this electrosmog. More than 1,500 cell towers in a 3-mile radius. What have we done? So this is what one of our Boston neighborhoods looks like with just the big cell antennas. This electro pollution is so out of control. And now the industry is pushing in these small cell antennas. I mentioned something earlier called the electromagnetic spectrum, and that shows how big the wavelengths for each one of these generations of technology. So right now with 4G, it's a long wavelength that can penetrate the buildings to get inside to connect with your antennas in your device. All that's left to monetize are these dinky little millimeter waves that they're looking at deploying for 5G, or they've already begun deploying. So 5G just means 5th generation technology. And the way they're selling it to us is that we're going to have faster entertainment downloads. We're going to have smart cities and super highways and, go us, boy, we're going to be so fast and connected. But look at who's buying up the entertainment industry. They know the wheels are coming off the bus for the wireless industry, so they're diversifying their portfolio. They're selling data. They're buying the entertainment industry and then pushing all these streaming services. And it's not like 5G can fly on its own, because these tiny little millimeter waves can't go far, but they'll carry vast quantities of data, but they can't go far. And they get disrupted by anything in the way, like a snowflake or a raindrop or a tree or a leaf or a building. So now, in addition to the 3G and 4G electro pollution that we've already got, they're adding an additional layer of 5G that has beamforming technology to find out where your device is and then gather all this energy, beamform it to get right to your device at close range. And that beam is going through everything in its path, including you and your children and our pollinators. So this is the addition of short millimeter waves. And the industry, because these things can't go very far, these new waves, their solution is to put more cell towers in at close range, every 2 to 12 houses, literally just feet from our bedroom windows, in the public access way, your public access way and mine. Literally with a cell tower outside the bedroom window that we have no control over unless we escape our homes. So the kicker is Senator Richard Blumenthal, who's the US Congressman from Connecticut, he asked at a commerce hearing 2 industry leaders, he said to them, so please share with us, how much money have you invested in independent science to prove this was safe before coming to market? And the industry guys kind of hemmed and hawed, but they were ultimately made to say, we don't know of any independent testing that's been done. So at this little clip here from our friends at the Environmental Health Trust, you can hear him say, so we are basically flying blind here as far as health and safety is concerned. So once again, they pushed this out with no safety testing. And now the science is really clear. This is a raw deal all around. Computer World and others are saying it's a bad joke. It doesn't even give us the faster speeds they're promising. And there went Verizon a year ago, rolling it out, putting out press releases. Woohoo, we're giving 5G to 100 million people now. So this little map here shows all these small cells that have already been installed all over Boston, in addition to the thousands of big cell antennas. So our big cities are getting so polluted that people are getting to the point where they can't be in our cities anymore because it's making them so sick. And this is not a popular one to share, but it is independent science. It is fact-based, and it was seriously peer-reviewed before it got published. So Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown published this paper to show evidence for a connection between COVID-19 and exposure to radio frequency from wireless, including 5G. And they're not insinuating that 5G caused the pandemic. What they are doing is pulling up the science and the evidence that show where you had 5G turned on, there were higher incidents of COVID cases and higher incidents of death. And once we understand the science, that's not a surprise at all, because our biological cells only have so much energy. And that's pretty well calibrated to do what we need to do with our energy to get us through our day, and then to do cell repair and regeneration at night in a clean environment. When you put radio frequency close range, nonstop, our poor cells are going, we cry uncle, we can't keep up. And so you see this whole domino effect of illness that starts happening. And then you add a virus on top of it. And what have our cells got to fight that? What has our immune system got to fight that, on top of the wireless, on top of the other environmental pollutants? And so it's no surprise that we see COVID got worse where there was a lot of radiation. So Dr. Magda Havas, who is co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference, she retired from Trent University, where she taught electromagnetics for 25 years. And she recognizes that most of our countries are not measuring the outdoor exposures of all this electrosmog. So she started a project that she's asking citizens for help with. It's called the Global EMF Monitoring Project. And she says, can you brag about your community? So she uses the BRAG acronym. So black is blackout really bad. That's the B. R is for red, where we're in the red zone. That's not good. A is for amber, where we're getting up into danger zones. And G is green, where outdoors, if the environment were 1,000 or less of these microwatts per square meter, would probably still do all right if you weren't right under the broadcasting, antennas. And if you had a clean space to let your body do its normal cell repair as part of our circadian rhythm in the wee hours of darkness. So she has this project. She invites the public to join her. And the equipment that she uses is this little Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. And for anybody who would like to participate as a citizen scientist and you're tempted to buy that meter, if you contact them, the makers of the meter are offering a discount code. I think it saves like 25% off of a $400 device. So contact globalemf.net and let them know you would like to be a citizen scientist, and they will go ahead and share with you what that discount code is. So thank you to Dr. Havas and her team for that incredible work. I've measured my town. I've measured towns around me when I go traveling. I measured down by my sisters in Georgia. Deb Hodgson and I, who's co-hosting today, we measured her town of Stratham, and we also measured Concord, New Hampshire, which is where their capital is. So you can see that there are varying degrees of exposures, and these black and reds, and even the yellows are areas that people who want to stay away from this would do well not to go. So what do some of the realistic measurements look like? The goal is to be less than 1,000. Up in Westmoreland, New Hampshire, one of the New Hampshire for Safe Tech members went and measured down at their fire department, and it was in the green. In Keene, New Hampshire, and again, this was a while back, it was in the yellow. Nashua, New Hampshire, hitting the red zone. Concord. We took this measurement during the pandemic where there weren't very many people walking around with their devices, and there weren't many cars going by with the radiation antennas in the cars and everyone's devices in the cars. But we were still in the red zone on a very quiet day from the cell towers, I think. And then in Stratham, where Deb and Rep. Patabrami live, there was a cell tower that was mounted right on the main strip in the center of their town there, and they're already in the blackout zone there. And then this is Hanover Street in Boston. This is what we call the North End, where all of our wonderful Italian restaurants and bakeries are. But if you look above, there's apartments that people have been living in for decades and decades. So they are right outside these cell towers. This pretty wrought iron one is one way that the industry gets these in. They'll say, oh, we'll make it look, blend in with the environment. It'll be a really nice addition to the street. But these are literally cell towers right at the curb. And the measurements we got on Hanover Street went as high as 613,000 microwatts per square meter. And again, we want to be at 1,000 or less. So that's what's happening in our big cities today. So the good news is, as Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, When we have important changes finally occur in our society, it comes through 3 channels. The public engages and learns about it and starts taking action, which is what we hope to inspire through these monthly webinars that we do twice every month. The courts eventually hold the guilty accountable and public policy is enacted. So I have some slides built out for each one of those, and I'll go through some of the highlights, and we'll spend another 10 minutes or so, and then we'll stop and do some Q&A to answer any questions you may have. So the highlight of the legal solutions is that when Dr. Shuren of the FDA told the FCC that they didn't need to change their public radiation exposure limits, that formal determination was filed by the FCC in something called the Federal Register. Once it hit the Federal Register, then the lawsuits began. And the Environmental Health Trust sued, the Children's Health Defense sued, and a number of other parties around the country sued, and it was all combined into one lawsuit that went before 3 judges on the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. So these folks presented the judges with 11,000 pages of evidence that had been entered into the public record with the FCC on the harm on this. They printed it out, and it was 27 big fat binders full of evidence of harm. And the judges are looking at all this evidence and looking at the science, and they say to the FCC, well, how did you determine that it's still okay to radiate the public at your current levels that were set back in 1996? And the FCC kind of did one of these and said, oh, the FDA said it was fine. And so they said to the FCC, well, where's the FDA's homework? Where's the independent review of the scientific literature that caused them to determine that this is okay? And truth be told, not one of our federal agencies has ever done the scientific assessment. We have a huge regulatory gap at the federal level. So the FCC got sued. The courts found the FCC guilty, and apparently the courts don't like to tell our federal agencies exactly what to do. So they said to the FCC, you have to go back and do better. You have to account, not just for cancers, but for infertility, for neurotoxicity, for the impact on children, for long-term impacts, because the FCC's testing only accounted for like 6 minutes on some tests and 30 minutes on another. What happens when you're exposed 24/7? And then they also said you have to account for the impact on the environment. And that ruling came down on Friday, the 13th of August in 2021. And the FCC has done not one thing to respond to that court order. So Children's Health Defense just in the last month has filed a petition with the courts to say, get the FCC to do their job. So that is very actively happening right now. And you can go in and look at all these other lawsuits and petitions that are happening all over the country. I do want to mention a groundbreaking initiative out in Pittsfield where Verizon put that cell tower on. For the first time in the United States, because the citizens would not back down, their city council finally commanded their Board of Health to investigate. Their Board of Health went and talked to the doctors who had given diagnoses of electromagnetic illnesses from the cell tower. They talked to the scientists, they talked to engineers, they listened to what the industry had to say, and they documented everything in their findings in an emergency order to Verizon, 24 pages, that says you have 7 days to come to the table and tell us why we should not issue a cease and desist order against you to shut off the radiation from that cell tower. And in their document, they have all the science and doctors and all of it in there, including discrediting the expert that the industry brings in. This Dr. Eric Swanson is one of them. And he comes in and says, oh, it's fine. Everything's within FCC guidelines. It's fine. There's no harm, microwave's fine. Well, they went and they investigated him and found out that, yes, he is a PhD out of Pennsylvania. And he's a physicist, but he has never published one paper on electromagnetic radiation. His specialty is quarks and some other physics fields. So he has no expertise, and yet he's the guy that they parade around from the industry. So they document their finding of no credibility on him. And so that is an excellent, excellent document to bring to your towns to open up this conversation. Say, look, we can save you some time. Look at what Pittsfield's Board of Health already found. So instead of coming to the table, Verizon on that 7th day went to the courts and got an injunction against the Board of Health saying, we don't think it's legal for them to try and stop us. What they did, the Board of Health had gone to their state level attorneys and consulted, and they determined that they believe that when the telecom law was enacted, that only applies to the placement of siting a cell antenna. Once that's up and operating in the community, if there are nuisances or harm to people or the environment, that is the jurisdiction of the Board of Health. It is their duty to ensure safety in the community. So they also spoke with attorneys to see what it would take to take this to court. There were a couple of different, scenarios that total added up to just about $84,000, which is not huge against, the emergency funds that towns have. And so Verizon does this injunction. The Board of Health wants to take this to court, and lo and behold, their mayor and their city attorney and their city council would not give their own Board of Health to do their job. They would not give them the funding to take this to court. And it looks like there's a lot of conflicts of interest with the mayor and the industry and the city solicitor who represents industry as well as the city of Pittsfield. So that became quite a mess out in Pittsfield, which left the citizens to sue the town to get back into their homes and remove that injunction so that the Board of Health can do their job and get these people back home. So that's what's happening right now. The lawsuit has happened. They gave their oral arguments in April, and we're now waiting for the judge to make his determination. And no judge has ever gone against a Board of Health in Massachusetts before. So this would be groundbreaking if that happens. We are hopeful that their Board of Health will be reinstated to do what they want to do, which is to get that cell tower moved. And there's already somebody in Pittsfield, a corporate landowner, commercial landowner, who said, we don't care, you can move that cell tower here. We're not anywhere near a residential area. So there are solutions ready, but Verizon has not proven to be a good corporate citizen. So there are lawsuits happening all over the country, all over the world, and you're welcome to go look at that. We just don't hear about them in mainstream media. So here's the bill that Deb and I worked with Rep. Abrami. He came down to my house with Deb. We sat at my kitchen table. We helped him connect the dots. They asked these really pointed questions like, why does the insurance industry already have exclusions in their policy for microwave radiation? Because they know it's one of the world's leading risks. So that can leave our towns holding the bag on damages if they don't have zoning code that insists that the industry has real protective insurance on this. Why does the legal fine print that we looked at even exist? And why is the FCC dropping the ball on all of this? So we got this bill passed in just 7 months in New Hampshire. And they spent a year, even during the pandemic, and they came out with this groundbreaking report that Dr. Kent Chamberlain talks us through. He was tapped to serve on this, and he was the chair at the University of New Hampshire of their computer and electronics engineering department. So he was an EMF guy for 30 years. Thought this would be a slam dunk. Of course, EMFs are fine. And then when he got into the investigation, he realized just how harmful this is. So he's done a 20-minute presentation here about what they found and what this report is. And he shares his slides so people can look at the actual science on this. And then in 2022, so this came out in late 2020, too late to introduce new bills in New Hampshire for 2021. So in 2022, Rep. Abrami and Senator Denise Ricciardi of Bedford, New Hampshire, She had fought cell towers in her town, so she co-sponsored the bill. Democrat, Republican, bipartisan bill. They thought they should start with the setback to stop any more toxic infrastructure coming in at close range. But what we didn't realize is that there were different members on this Science, Tech, and Energy Committee now, some years later, and we didn't get ahead of it with enough education soon enough because industry was already in their ear. So at the end of the day, we got testimonies, we got experts in there again. Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada sent in testimony saying that wireless is not even advanced technology anymore. It's outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. We should be bringing fiber optics to and through the premises where we just simply hook up indoors with safe, reliable, fast Ethernet cables and adapters. So this is a really good document also to share with your towns because he outlines exactly what we should be doing. So the House Science and Tech and Energy Committee did vote 15-3 that there is something here. They weren't comfortable doing these setbacks, but they thought new legislation should be allowed in the next session, which brings us to 2023. So because they didn't have an appetite to actually do setbacks, the industry has gotten in at the state level in more than half of the United States and has manipulated the law to allow them to take away local municipal control and just start shoving all this small cell infrastructure in at close range. So Attorney Scott McCullough, who represented the Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense in that landmark lawsuit, he was gracious to look at the New Hampshire existing law. And, he understood the climate. The legislators that were speaking with him said, we can't do anything earth shattering because it's never going to get through this particular committee. So what could we do modestly? And so Scott wrote a bill that would give control back to the local municipalities and say, look, your law right now says that any application that the industry puts in has to comply with local building code, but you're missing a few opportunities here. You can also add in that it also has to comply with local electrical code, and it also has to comply with local fire code. And you should add these new national standards from the IEEE, which is the Engineering National Group, and APCO, which does site hardening, to say that with these man-made disasters, with natural disasters, if you have a communication facility up, you want to make sure it's going to stand hard and fast in a crisis. So they've got really good ideas in there for what our town should be doing to make sure that we don't lose communication in an emergency. And the industry got up there and said, oh, we should take that out of this bill. That doesn't really even apply to 5G or, whatever. So I reached out to the APCO people and they wrote back and they say, we don't slice it by what generation, but it's a good idea for all of this wireless infrastructure to be hardened. And so these industry people are just unconscionable. And they talk about all the economic benefit that it's going to bring to their state. And so lo and behold, the chair of this committee, Representative Michael Vos, had gotten a hold of the chair of the sponsor of the bill, who this session is Lucius Partial, Representative Lucius Partial, and said, we'd like to modify a few things in the bill. And I understand there's always some give and take. And so he said, okay, well, if you tweak this or that, there would still be enough in the bill to be more protective than what's in the law today. So the day of this executive session, Chair Vos puts out this amendment to the bill, first time these guys are looking at it, and then asks for a vote. So they vote, they agree to go ahead and make these changes, thinking that they would then take it to the floor of the House and support this bill. So next in this committee, they have to vote exactly what they're going to do when they go to the floor of the House. And I'll be darned if the chair and his party all voted against the amendment that he had just asked for. So it went to the House, to the floor, and it just died on the table. So these politics, I don't get. But, they say God doesn't close a door without opening a window. And right as that was happening, I was contacted by Representative Tracy Quint out of Maine, and her young adult children and constituents were starting to talk to her about wireless impact on the birds and the bees and the insects and children. And so I was able to connect her with other people in Maine who are really knowledgeable on this. And she wrote a bill. It went before the committee, and they agreed to let her have a little more time to modify the bill. It was originally going to go through the University of Maine to do an investigation on this, but they came back and said, we don't really have expertise. So she was rewriting the bill to have them do what New Hampshire did, was to get an independent commission to look at this issue. So we're waiting to see what will become of that amendment in the bill. I just heard that it passed out of committee by like a 6-5 vote. And now it's going to move its way up the chain through the legislature. So if you're in Maine, reach out to your legislators and ask them to support this bill. Connecticut has one on smart meters and small cells. And here in Massachusetts, we've had these 3 bills to form a commission to protect kids from handheld devices, to protect our kids and the staff in schools. Those have been around for a long time, and the smart meter bill has been around almost for 10 years now. And we've gotten them out of committee in the past, but then they die before they ever get enacted. So Scott McAuliffe was very gracious. He wrote a civil rights bill to make it a civil right that anybody who needs accommodations should have that right to ask for accommodations when they go out into, public places or privately held venues, to say, I have this disability, whether it be electromagnetic illnesses or other disabilities, but to get it codified in our laws to make it strong so that people can ask for help. And then he wrote another one that Courtney Gilardi, who lives in Pittsfield, this one was introduced by her Senator Mark. This one was introduced by her state representative, who actually lives in the neighborhood where that toxic cell tower is. And right now in Massachusetts, as most states do, there's a registry of harm that our local boards of health and health agents can look at for the town to say, gosh, how many people had food poisoning in this last quarter or month or whatever? How many people got COVID? Now they want to add electromagnetic sensitivities to that so we can start tracking when people say, yeah, I'm sick from this wireless radiation. And then we will have it registered, and then we can draw reports. Once we have good data, we can make better decisions for public health. So all these bills are in play right now. There are bills in other states too. And if you go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our resources page, you can get to a link for bills in other states as well. So the industry comes in and says, oh, the people who are complaining, those are the NIMBYs, they're not in my backyard. Nobody else cares about this. It's fine. Well, our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have over 150 groups across the nation who are standing up and speaking out and working in their communities to strengthen their zoning bylaws and get this fixed at the local level. So don't believe what industry says. Fact check everything. And on your own time, you can go through and look at what other towns around our state are doing. And then at the municipal levels, the city of Boston's already been active on this for years. And in Burlington, Massachusetts, they came up with a small cell policy that had the industry withdrawing their close range cell antennas because they didn't want to set a precedent for an annual review of each one of those small cells, or to pay a fee to get an independent consultant to do the annual review. So they're like, we don't want to set a precedent for a fee or for annual recertification. So our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have taken the Burlington small cell policy and other good zoning code from around the country, and they now have a whole toolkit for you and I to use with our towns with a checklist. Compare it to what you already have in your local zoning code, what's missing, and here's a template for how to get to good zoning code. So others are already doing this. So know that those tools are there. And like in Easton, Connecticut, a grandmother figured out what 5G is, took it to her town. There was a doctor on her town board, and they put a moratorium on 5G. So it can be done in our schools. Oh my goodness, you guys, we really need to protect the kids. They are just getting so harmed. And New York Times did a series of articles about what Silicon Valley execs are doing. They're sending their kids to schools with no technology, not hardwired, not wireless. They know a child's brain doesn't develop best in the shallows of a screen. They know they develop best through meaningful interaction with their families, with their teachers, with their peers, and with the natural environment. They're even going so far as having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And yet they are forcibly pushing all this technology in on our kids. But for every problem, there's a solution. And the folks who have Americans for Responsible Technology also have a project called Tech Safe Schools. And they too have resources there. They will send information to your schools to help you open this conversation. So reach out to Tech Safe Schools. The Massachusetts Coalition on Breast Cancer already has curriculum for kindergarten through 12th grade. And here's the professional development training that Dr. Alexia McKnight and I did. You can watch the video, and in the video description on YouTube, you'll find our slides. So we have solutions for everything. We can train the entire school, in half an hour online. It's not rocket science. And then the Environmental Health Trust has a ton of 1- and 2-page fact sheets. They have little postcards you can have printed, so you always have something on hand to open these difficult conversations. Maryland, the state of Maryland, has become the first to come out with a fact sheet to protect the kids in schools. And then there's a green certification program called the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools. They have a module on low EMF best practices. And then other countries have already put safe technology solutions for studying at home. So all this is there. We have the medical conference. You have to enroll by June 15th and complete it by July 1st, but it is there. The first medical school textbook has just come out, and you can access this on our resources page too for healthcare practitioners. So we have so many amazing resources today for you to share. And all this, if you're not a do-it-yourselfer and you really feel intimidated by hardwiring, an electrician can come in and hardwire your house. If you want someone to come in and measure not only the EMFs, but formaldehyde, mold, water, all of that, there's an entire career called building biologists who have been very highly trained and certified to do this kind of indoor testing. You can hire a building biologist to come in. A lot of people watch together this award-winning film called Generation Zapped. And our little effort here of getting our schools to be the first in the nation to even have this sign, that was featured in Generation Zapped. And the film was chosen as part of the United Nations Film Festival, among other accolades that it received. Amazon Prime now has this in their collection. Our libraries and their streaming services, most of them have it. So it's easy to get and to watch. Sit down and watch it with your neighbors, with your loved ones, with the parents of the kids that hang out with, and start a meaningful conversation. PBS, Bert Wolf's travel show, has already done 2 episodes. So Americans for Responsible Technology, here's that toolkit I spoke about. So lots of great resources. And our kids and the kids in our life, they are watching what we do. So we need to start retraining ourselves on how to take a break, how to set technology aside and go back and do all the amazing things that life offers us if we just get our thumbs out of our phones for a while. So model good behavior. And this is another area of science that I was so grateful to learn about on this journey. We talked about the Earth's electrons that come up and regulate our own bioelectrical systems. Now that we walk around on rubber-soled shoes, we don't get the benefit of that healing energy. We don't sleep on the earth anymore. We're not, riding on a horse that's connected to the earth anymore. We're in a car with rubber sneakers on it. So Dr. Conover wrote this book to teach us how to get out and naturally ground again. And you don't actually have to go barefoot. She's got a dozen or more ways each season that you can ground naturally. You know, who knew if your pet is on the ground, you just rub their less furry areas like the snout or the ears, you're instantly grounded, or touch the high water content of plants and trees, and you're instantly grounded. So again, there's a solution for everything. So at the municipal level, we need to help our towns learn that the Centers for Disease Control already has something called the ALARA principle, which means we want to get to as low as reasonably achievable with any man-made or natural microwave radiation emissions or electromagnetic emissions. So that's the goal. So first, they're going to want to investigate. They can go to my municipal leaders page. They can look at this free online resource called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, and just start differentiating between the spin that the industry's given our towns and what's truly in the best interest of the public. So hardwire to and through the premises. We can do collaboratives with regional towns to get all the fiber optics brought right to the premises. And then we just educate and teach people to keep their own spaces and our public places as low as reasonably achievable with radio frequency emissions. And again, we've always got to measure, not against those, FCC limits that were never protected to begin with, but against the biological effects. And we have these resources to remind us what the biological effects are. So we can't kid ourselves. There is no safe level of man-made microwave radiation in the scientific literature. So just because you don't feel it today doesn't mean it's not impacting you on a cellular level, like cancers and infertility that don't show up for a long time. It is biologically affecting us all and our pollinators. Dr. Linda Birnbaum is the woman who was the top scientist for the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, and she had the National Toxicology Program under her. And in an interview that she did, she said, there are definitely captured agencies, but there are an awful lot of really good public servants that need to be empowered to do the right thing. And that empowerment comes from you and I at the local and the state level to give that push up to the federal level. So what can we do? Please invite people to come to our education forums. Anybody can join the sessions. And I can be brought in to do trainings in towns. These are examples of where folks have brought me in. And let's start training our schools as soon as possible. And start where you are. What do you do for work? Or what do your kids do for work? Or what do your loved ones do for work? What professional associations is anybody a part of? They're always looking for speakers at their conferences. So let's get the information going and use these amazing resources that we have. So our town should, technology's here to stay. Let's get in front of it and start forming technology safety committees, make sure that every town has an opt-out from these toxic smart meters, and then start the transition to safe technology in our public areas. And our towns, most of our attorneys are just really good attorneys, but they do not have expertise, and they are no match for the wireless industry. So it behooves our towns to hire a special counsel like Burlington, Massachusetts did, bring them in to rewrite your zoning code and get it right up front. And that's what this checklist starts us with from Americans for Responsible Technology. Andrew Campanelli used to work for industry till he realized what their game was. He switched teams and now he represents industries and municipalities and individuals. So there are others like him as well that we can help you find. So for today, just notice, what is radiating? What are your habits? Start with baby steps because we know this is overwhelming. So take one step and pat yourself on the back and then take a next step. Try to create a sleep sanctuary as soon as you can, because if our bodies don't get to rest and repair, then the cumulative damage is building up. And then migrate over to Ethernet cables and adapters. Keep your own devices in airplane mode as much as you can. Only turn on the one antenna and only for as long as you need it. And, here's some more of those great resources from Environmental Health Trust that you can use to remind yourself. They have a checklist for if you really want to get into the weeds on this, everything that you should be looking for, and just information to pass along. So thank you. You can reach New Hampshire for Safe Technology through their Facebook page, or you can email them directly at newhampshireforsafetechnology@gmail.com. Here's a link to our website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And, we have so limited resources to begin with that there's no need for other groups to reinvent the wheel. If they like what we built in Massachusetts, they're welcome to just pair with us and send people my way. We've got what's going on at our state level efforts. We've got links to link out to the local municipalities. We've got resources so people don't have to take our word. They can look at the science for themselves. And we post what's going on in the local news because mainstream media hardly covers this. So when you take it to your town and they're like, oh, you sound like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, say, look at what all these other towns are already doing and we're falling behind. So go to the news page for that. And then all of our events are listed on the events page. And then here's some information to link you up with the folks who can help you start taking action. So please reach out. If you do contact us, that will come directly to me, or you can just email me at ma4safetech@gmail.com. So thank you, everybody, for listening along with us today. We may have some new folks. I recognize a number of you because we're all learning step by step. So we're grateful that you come back to join us. If anybody has questions, Deb, you can facilitate that, or people can raise their hands, and we will be happy to answer questions.
Sure. There are no questions in the chat. So if anybody has a question, you can either raise your hand or unmute yourself and feel free to ask your question.
Okay. Well, I
we've
would like
got
to
one.
Okay.
Sydney, it looks like.
Hi, Sydney. Nice to see you again.
Hi, I'll start my video. Nice to see you. I'm sorry I got on a little late, but I absolutely, and you make these slides available, correct?
Yes.
Right? Yes, good. I just wanted to mention something here in California that just came up. There's been a bill introduced to fast track even more for cell towers they're going to the bill. I should send you the link to it. It's where a company, as you know, a telecom company, can actually combine two applications in one. The shot clock is good for both, and if it's not acted on with not 90 days but 60 days, it's deemed approved. Even if the application is incomplete, it'll be deemed approved. I mean, it's the worst bill, and so it just came through. I know. I should send it to you. It has to be, rejected. I mean, we have to move on this, but
yeah, they try to strip local control at the state level, and then our towns are like, well, it's the law. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah, and
so
it's going to be really hard for any municipality to get on this because they don't have the staff, and they're overwhelmed.
Right.
And then they start doing two. Plus, then you have you have one here and one there. Anyway, just wanted to mention that.
Oh, it's so horrific. Right. So one of the approaches that's being tried right now in Massachusetts is a number of towns have written a petition, and they went out and they got the required number of citizens to sign their petition. And in the petition, they say that until the FCC does its court order mandate to bring the radiation exposure limits in line with the science, we are putting a condition in our zoning code to say this application is not going to be considered complete until the FCC does its due diligence. So we have the town of Upton, we have the town of Sheffield and Great Barrington that are doing that. And now Chester, Massachusetts has just introduced similar language. Paul McGavin helped with the language on Chester's. And on Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, Courtney Gilardi and Patricia Burke from Millis, Massachusetts are going to be doing a forum online by Zoom. And in the communique that I sent out this morning, you will find the link to go to that forum and learn more about their thinking behind these town warrant articles. And Patricia Burke is doing something that she was inspired by from Pittsfield. So those who have been following the Pittsfield case will remember that finally their city council was caught between the rock and the hard place, between the citizens and between industry and the law, and they didn't know what to do. So they sent letters to their state level authorities, to their legislators from the state, and then their Massachusetts legislators up in DC. And they also sent it to, I think, the Association of Mayors and the Municipal Association, and said, we need you guys to step up and protect us here in our towns. And they also sent one off to the FCC to say, we need to be truly protected. And so Patricia Burke went to her town, and she was making this opportunity available to follow suit to her Board of Health and her select board. And we went in and met with somebody on her Board of Select Persons, and she went and met with their Board of Health, but they never acted on it. They didn't do anything. And it turns out that where she had asked this one letter to be given to the Board of Health, nobody ever gave it to their Board of Health. So they got their wires crossed. And so that's why she went ahead and said, we can't wait for our town to get it together. We need to take charge. And so she did the citizen petition to get the letter sent by the town to all these other authorities. And I think that is a wonderful action that all of our towns could take to start putting the pressure from the grassroots up through the town to the state up to the feds. And that's likely what's going to have to happen to get meaningful change at the federal level as we work it through the courts at the same time.
Do you have the copy of that petition? Is there one where we can see the language?
I think if you look in what I sent out today, you might find links.
Okay.
Okay. I know we've been going a little million miles an hour lately, and I know I need to update my website with some of this too. But we have been putting them in my newsletters, which you can get on our news page as well. Okay.
Thank you.
So, and Sydney, thank you. I know you and your neighbors and colleagues there in California have been working on this tirelessly for years too, even down to protecting the little kitty cat next door that had one of those trackers on it. The cat kept taking it off because it knew it wasn't right.
Yeah, he's on the 4th tracker now. In fact, I've taken more videos, and just today I'm trying to figure out how I can edit and make them a little more professional, because he's on the 4th tracker, and I've taken readings each time of each tracker. So now I've got records of 4 different trackers, and they're using the Safe and Sound Pro exactly how much radiation.
And that'll be excellent. When you say how much radiation there is, be sure and tell them what the science is telling us it should be. Yes. So I'd love to share that when you get that pulled together, Sydney. Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, so feel free to go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and look at any of our resources that might help. Feel free to reach out if we have any questions. And thank you again to everybody who's watching this, not live and didn't get a chance to ask questions, but just reach out to us. We're here to help. And Deb, thank you again for giving us your time to co-host with us. And for those who are in New Hampshire, please reach out to us, because over the summer, we want to start meeting with your senator, because if we can get the right information to each one of the senators in New Hampshire, then Senator Denise Ricciardi is willing to introduce a new bill in January. But the Senate's a tough place to be right now, and she tells the truth, so she's not terribly popular. So I have a hunch she'll win them over because she has such integrity. But we as the citizens need to do the legwork and get them educated before the legislation comes out. So anybody in New Hampshire, and that goes for Massachusetts too, reach out and let's start setting up those important meetings. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you for giving us a couple hours today. We hope you found some inspiration and some tips to keep your life tech safe. So thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Cece.
afternoon, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.